What's up, guys? So, OBS, starting off in OBS Studio, weird intro. Let's just get into it. We're going to be doing part 2 of the German Revolution. Part 1, for just a brand new channel, I would thank you for the support. But it's 8 views, come on. I'm not going to leak my main, but on my main, I was getting 200 views. And I could post 3 times a day, and I had 197.
Is your ramen back in stock? It is. Sorry it kept flying off the shelf.
Let's just
revolution that could lead to a civil war.
Let me check if it's recording real quick. Okay, let's get into it.
Ebert, the leader of the majority Socialist Party, met with the leaders of the old regime. They reached an agreement, and Ebert was made chancellor. Karl Liebknecht, recently released from prison, returned to Berlin and planned to proclaim Germany a socialist republic. SPD Deputy Chairman Philipp Scheidemann heard about this and immediately stepped out a balcony of the Reichstag and proclaimed Germany a democratic republic in front of demonstrators. This upset Ebert, who wished to leave their choice of political system to a national assembly. Just hours later, Liebknecht proclaimed that Germany was now a socialist republic and called for elections to form the Council of People's Deputies, who on November 11th signed the armistice that officially ended World War I. The new government passed the 8-hour workday and severely strengthened worker unions. They expanded social insurance, unemployment benefits, and worker compensations, while working on a series of projects to improve health insurance and housing availability. In the meantime,
and this is huge. You have to act quickly, because these socialists, they took quick, like the Bastille in the French Revolution. If Louis did this, if King Louis XVI did this, it's not 17th, it's 16th. People think it's 17th, it's 16th. His grandfather was Louis the 15th. So, this is huge. If Louis did this, I think the French Revolution could have been avoided.
The Supreme Command was raising its own paramilitary force, the Freikorps. Paramilitary organizations that would operate inside Germany. Many of its members were former soldiers who struggled to readjust to civilian life. They were very nationalistic and ferociously anti-socialist. In December, all of Germany's councils were to meet in Berlin to vote on whether to make Germany a council or Soviet republic. Ebert and his government ordered the army to move into Berlin to prevent the convention, but while attempting to arrest the council leaders, the soldiers opened fire on unarmed demonstrators who were supporting the convention, killing 16 people. Despite the massacre, Ebert's plan to prevent the convention failed. But it was also unnecessary. The convention voted overwhelmingly against the creation of a council system and instead supported Ebert's call for elections to choose a constituent national assembly that would decide upon the state system. During the revolution, an elite regiment, the Revolutionary Guard, had been stationed in Berlin to protect the government. But Ebert now feared that they were getting too friendly with the Spartakists. So on December 23rd, he dismissed them from Berlin and ordered to reduce their members. To force them to comply, the city commander Otto Wels held their pay. The Revolutionary Army seized the Reichschancellery and arrested several members of the government until their salaries were paid.
This is huge. They're armed. Rebellion is one thing, but then they don't have power. If it's not a democratic country, they don't have power until they're armed. They're armed. This is really where it'll kick off.
Chancellor Ebert called upon the army to force them out, attacking them in the skirmish of the Berlin Schloss. However, many of Ebert's soldiers defected, and the Berlin police, led by Emil Eichhorn, refused to act against the revolutionaries. With over 30 dead and 50 wounded, the battle was a clear defeat for Ebert's government, who was forced to pay the sailors and postpone their size reduction. However, the confrontation was a turning point for the Spartakists. Tired of the SPD, they left the party and formed the German Communist Party, KPD. On January 4th, 1919, Ebert dismissed Police Chief Eichhorn for failing to act against the revolutionaries and demonstrating workers. Hundreds of thousands took to the streets the very next day, many of them armed. The demonstrators occupied train stations and several newspapers that the previous day had called not only for the raising of more Freikorps, but for the murder of the Spartakists. On January 8th, Ebert decided to use troops stationed in Berlin against the occupiers. They violently quelled an improvised revolt on January 9th, and just a few days later, the Freikorps moved into Berlin. They brutally cleared several buildings and executed the occupiers on the spot.
This is huge. They were armed, but then he brought in the military, brought in this recruitment. It's huge.
Freikorps murdered at least 100 workers, even those who surrendered. Just a few days later, Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht were arrested and delivered to a Freikorps division that beat them up and executed them. The perpetrators of the murders went mostly unpunished. After coming to power, the SPD government had not wiped out the Army Supreme Command or the judiciary. And now, the judges, many longing for a return to the old order, gave right-wing criminals, assassins and terrorists a slap on the wrist for their crimes as long as the victims were either revolutionaries or associated with the new democratic German state. The few people that went to prison for the murder of the Spartacus leaders were later compensated by the Nazi government, and later investigations showed that the murders of Karl and Rosa had been approved by Ebert himself. From this point on, the political differences between the SPD and the KPD became insurmountable.
When it splits, it hurts. You have to unify. Just like England and Scotland. England will always beat Scotland. Edward Longshanks, Hammer of the Scots. He defeats Scotland he heavily defeats Scotland for a decade or two. Because they're divided already. They were in a succession crisis, which is how England got control of them as a vassal already. So, John Balliol, and then there was Robert the Bruce's father and his family, incredibly influential in Scotland, who were the main rival to the throne. So if half of Scotland is divided, you can't expect to fight to the superior power. They've divided here. The Germans, this is really where it's gonna.
And the following years, they would be unable to work together to stop the rising threat from the Nazi Party. The first elections came shortly after. The SPD became the strongest party and joined with other center parties to form the Weimar Coalition. Ebert was elected president. The new Weimar Constitution offered more possibilities for a direct democracy by setting up a mechanism for referendums. It also had a simple rule. You gain 60,000 votes, you gain 1 seat in parliament. While this allowed for more representation, it also made it very difficult to build coalitions. In fact, no parties achieved a majority during the 1920s. There was another massive problem. Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution granted the president the authority to rule against the majority in the Reichstag with the help of the army, if need be. Article 48 would become instrumental in destroying German.
I love how it says don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment, share.
Democracy. In Bavaria, the USPD,
you should do that with this video,
who had political control over the state after the Bavarian king's resignation, suffered a crushing defeat in the elections. Eisner, the Bavarian USPD leader, was assassinated by a right-wing terrorist just days later. Listen, I know this looks bad, but I swear it was him. Rumors blamed another socialist leader who was then shot twice by one of Eisner's supporters while inside the parliament.
And this is like what he explained in the last part of this reaction earlier in the video, that it was rumors spread, and they thought the Jews were responsible for the army because it was the socialists that really did it, and 8 out of 10 of them were Jews.
Out, killing 2 other members. Because of the chaos, Bavaria no longer had an effective government. The new socialist leader, Johannes Hoffmann, organized a new coalition government, but was overthrown by a group of communists who proclaimed Bavaria to be a Soviet republic. But this government was then overthrown by another communist group, who were then overthrown by the return of Hoffmann and several thousand soldiers and Freikorps, who brutally ended the Soviet republic. 600 people were killed during the fighting, 300 of them civilians. After their victory, Freikorps executed at least 1,000 people suspect of being communist. Bavaria officially joined the Weimar Republic. The left was divided once more, and the chaos of the period made the state shift significantly to the right. In June 1919, the government signed the Treaty of Versailles, officially ending World War I. The treaty made Germany renounce sovereignty over its colonies and lose a large portion of territory. A part of Germany would be occupied for 15 years by the Allies, and they were forced to pay massive reparations, the amount of which no one even knew how to estimate. They also had to accept all guilt for the war and its consequences. All of this was incredibly upsetting for Germans, who despised the treaty and those who signed it. But there was another demand. The treaty required Germany to demilitarize significantly, and that meant that the Freikorps had to be disbanded. In February 1920,
Wow.
Defense Minister Noske ordered the disbandment of two of the most powerful Freikorps divisions that were stationed near Berlin. These Freikorps were extremely opposed to Eber's democratic government, and their commander Erhard refused the dissolution. He reached out to his allies Wolfgang Kapp, Generals Walter Lüttwitz, Erich Ludendorff, and even Waldemar Pabst, the
Ludendorff is the important one because he was one of the top guys in World War I.
and responsible for the murders of Liebknecht and Luxemburg. Erhard ordered his brigade to march into Berlin and ruthlessly break any resistance. They carried swastikas on their helmets and vehicles, and it was here that it would become a symbol for anti-government and anti-Jewish sentiment. The city's defenders refused to fire on the soldiers, claiming that Reichswehr doesn't fire on Reichswehr. The government fled the city. With support from the troops and higher echelons of society, Kapp declared himself Chancellor.
Okay, that's it. Part 2 is going to come out soon. Thank you for watching. Hoping this is still recording. It's still recording. Thank you so much for watching. See you tomorrow.